Well, thank you. And good evening, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Books and Books. I'm Mitchell, and I want to thank you all for being here tonight. And I particularly want to thank all of those of you who are watching in the internet or on the internet. I guess you don't watch in the internet, you're on the internet. And I want to thank all of you for being here as well. As you know, if you're watching and you'd like a book to be signed, feel free to call the store. The number's on the screen, and we'll make sure that we get you a copy, and we'll ship it out to you for free. Actually, the shipping will be free. You'll have to pay for the book. We do a lot of different events at Books and Books, and an evening like tonight is an evening which is very special for us. I think we presented Bob Stone for just as long as I can remember. We've been open now 32 years, and I think each book he's been kind enough to make his way to our store, and we honor him for that, and we thank him for that greatly. And his new book, Death of the Black-Haired Girl, is a new novel that has gotten already rave reviews everywhere from Kirkus to Madison Smart Bell. Publishers Weekly have said marvelous things about this. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, you're in for a really big treat. Another big treat tonight is welcoming a friend for an equally as long period of time, someone who's been a friend of the store from the time the store opened, and now we're happy to say lives a good part of the year here in Miami. And that's Russell Banks, who's got a new collection that has just come out called A Permanent Member of the Family. He was at the book fair, and I'm sure that we'll have him here at the store sometime soon. So please give Russell a big, big round of applause.
Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you for inviting me to say a few introductory words for Bob Stone. It's a compliment to me, and I'm pleased to be able to do this because Bob and I have known each other now for about 30 to 40 years or somewhere along that line, and I have been a devoted reader and fan of his work for all that time. And I have enormous admiration for him and for his enterprise as it's gone on over these years. He's a writer who kind of carved a path for a lot of us in his generation, and I think some of the writers in the next coming beyond that generation, right from the very beginning with A Hall of Mirrors and Dog Soldiers and A Flag for Sunrise. These early books taught us a lot. They taught us, first of all, that being an American writer didn't mean that you were at the center of the universe. It meant that you were part of a much larger world. And his books, throughout this wonderful and distinguished career, have reinforced that over and over again. Another thing he did, which had not been done much before and has not, unfortunately, been done much since either, is that he showed us in his fiction that even the most quotidian and ordinary lives have a historical and political context. And that is affirmed in every single book that he has written. International, historical, and political. And then a fourth thing, perhaps, sometimes ignored or forgotten or neglected because of the drama and the clarity of those other aspects of his work, is that there is at the center of his work a kind of spiritual longing, not despair, quite different from that. And I've always been very moved by that, by his insistence on that. In a funny, odd way, I hate doing this kind of thing and crossing, he's like so-and-so mixed with so-and-so. They do that in Hollywood a lot. But he's a little bit like Hawthorne mixed with Conrad in some ways. And I've always admired that insistence on his part, as well as the kind of ferocity of his intelligence and his incredible passion for his characters and for their lives, and something else which is sometimes not noticed in his work, but which I find wonderful, is his sense of the ridiculous, his sense of humor. The books are also very funny. He's a man, I think, who stands at the crossroad of American culture. If you think of American culture as being crossed by spiritual longing and by violence, and I do, and so I in some ways he's a central writer for our time, especially perhaps in the 21st century. So, Bob, it's just a pleasure to be here with you and to hear you. I hope everyone else understands how much that means to me, and I hope it means something to you as well.
Russell, thank you. I mean, it's an honor to be introduced here, to be with you here tonight, and I think of how much of your work has been centered on the history of this country, on the political directions that this country has taken, perversely and otherwise. But I think there are very many writers, working today who have, so accurately and intensely defined American history as you have. I think you're going to be remembered and experienced as one of the most historically acute novelists who's worked in these overlapping century. And thanks for the good word, and thanks for your work, for the work you've done over the years, and to be here, to be in this store in Mitch's establishment. I mean, of all the people fighting the good fight in the world of books, I can't think of anyone who's worked harder or done more than Mitch Kaplan. I mean, without Mitch, it would be the world of books, the world of the passing of books between writer and reader would be something entirely different. And for Mitch's being here, for the presence of Books and Books, I mean, we have a situation so much more hopeful, so much better, so much more to feel good about, to be optimistic about than we would otherwise have. I don't think we can say enough for what Mitch has done over the years, over the time. It's always, it always sort of raises the spirits to be here, to be in this store, to see Mitch, to see what he's doing. I mean, I can't think of anyone that I've ever run into in the world of books who cared more about books, about writers, about the people who worked for him and with him than Mitch Kaplan. He's an extraordinary person, an extraordinary presence in the world of books, and I'd like to thank him for being here, and I'd like to thank him for having me here, and to say what a pleasure and what an honor it is to be, here in Books and Books again. And also, and to all of you who've come tonight, well, thanks thanks for being here, because, if you're not out there, then, where are we? So I'm going to read from Death of the Black-Haired Girl, the novel that I got, somehow I managed to finish, and which exists here to my astonishment, and so without further blather, I will read some sections from it. It takes place on a university campus, the campus of an elite university, as I've been saying, and the characters are a student who takes on the cause of women's autonomy. And the other character introduced here is her widowed father, who was a retired New York City policeman. Let's just start with her father, who finds himself alone and alienated in a world increasingly lost to him in many ways. Everybody hear me? Okay. Eddie Stack had developed an odd skill. He was able to comb his hair, what was left of it, without looking at his own face in the mirror. He kept his gaze above the hairline. Some foreign wit had observed that after 40, a man was responsible for his own face. Stack was over 40. In fact, he was over 65. And he desperately did not want any more responsibilities beyond those he bore. The face wanted answering for. Young, he had never got enough of it. Don't think he hadn't looked in mirrors then. He had the deadpan, dumb Mick face that could be transformed within a fractal to the deadliest of satirical grins. And the assumed angry face, the hassle face, the put-upon, uncontainable rage face that would break his partners up in the middle of a collar. The false smiles and the semi-genuine smiles and the honest smiles that were not entirely unstudied. Not until he had gone into the job had he realized how attractive he was to women. Most women kind of loved all police officers, but Detective Stack was envied in his appeal. There was also, he vaguely knew, a mug of true rage, and that was the one he looked at. That was the one he never looked at, and yet privately had worn sometimes. His entire life was private now, and he knew he must wear it very often. Look at the face on him, his mother used to say, fondly. But the face on him now, the one he might have to avoid in the mirror, and the one he wore on the street was another matter. Richmond Hill was an immigrant neighborhood now. Most people there now simply did not resemble him. They were not fair or tall. They were not bleeders, as white boxers had once been called in the fight game. When he wore his face on the street, a face now flayed by alcohol and high blood pressure and a volatile temperament, he could imagine he was being spotted as a boozy Irishman, a slave to drink and an aging ruffian. To what might be on Lefferts Boulevard a state of curiosity at one of the aboriginal inhabitants of Queens by a recently arrived Bengali or Mauritanian or Parsi, and those he suspected as despising of his kind. He showed the watery blue eyes, the rosy face. His strategy was to take his glasses off so that he would not see clearly the expressions of passers-by or his own reflection in store windows. Beyond his own front hedges, which he paid a friendly Ecuadorian to trim, he truly did feel responsible for his face. Almost, he thought, ashamed. What caused him to have his bushes trimmed by a hired man was actually what drove him nearest to actual shame. He went on his errands step by step, and only after using or neglecting to use his 3 maintaining inhalers. He had emphysema that the doctors now called severe, so outstripped on the sidewalk by people 20 years older than himself, blocking the progress of young women uttering impatient sighs behind him. He tried not to notice or even to see straight. He felt ashamed of himself. Early on, before the diagnosis, he had stopped cold climbing the 2nd flight of stairs at the deep down Jackson Heights subway station. About to pass him on the way down was a beautiful young woman, one to speculate about, a babe. Dry drowning as he was, she got his attention. "Oh, sir," she said, "oh, sir, can I help you?" He wondered if he would ever be the same after that. Smoking had done it as well, and especially his useless, as he saw it, presence at the Twin Towers, the pile. He never mentioned that, not that there was anyone to mention it to. Plenty of people he knew had been there. Some, quite a few, had died there. Then there were those who had been there a month and a half after and talked about nothing else. There were those who had not been there and said they had. What Stack knew was the dark side of it, by which he did not mean the misled lads from afar with their faith-based initiatives, or the poor victims, God help them, but a different human dimension. Nothing was so bad it didn't have a dark side, Stack thought. On a warmish morning in December, he set out for the boulevard, a quarter-mile downhill. It was cloudy, without the stimulation of winter. He did not need the paper to know it was a bad air day. His tactical plan was to walk the downhill stretch, past the tidy houses of his enterprising neighbors, and buy a Times. He had once been a follower of events, but it was pretty much the sports section now. Beside the Times, he would buy a Post because it was Friday and he wanted the Sunday line. Stack had been firmly ordered to walk on errands rather than drive, the principle of use it or lose it. He walked down the boulevard with his practiced obliviousness to what he had grown up calling the candy store, where Morris had sold egg creams and reportedly run a handbook. It was owned by a Pakistani now, an old man in a white cap that showed he had made the Hajj to Mecca. The old man had turned out to be a jolly old-timer, cheerful, even jokey, though not as hilarious as Morris had been. A glum young relative of the old man's was at the counter that day. Stack bought the papers and took the most level route home. The house was neatly kept, although his household appliances needed replacing. The furniture was a museum of early 60s style. Stack did not shop for furniture. He had brought maritime prints at one point, and they were on the walls, along with a painting Maud had done as a teenager. The prints and the painting cheered him somewhat. After his wife died, Maud passed her and Maud had passed her devout stage. He had removed the crucifix from the living room and carefully tucked it away beside Maud's tarot cards, which she had wrapped in silk. He took down all the religious sacramentals and put them in a closet, except for a reproduction of a Leonardo, the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. That hung in the upstairs hall. He felt a little guilty about the stuff. It bothered him, religion aside. He would not put the objects in the garbage, which would be grossly disrespectful, and he did not want to outrage the sanitation guys. In the evening, he took his second walk of the day to an old Presbyterian church that now had a Korean congregation. The church basement was the location of his AA meeting. No Koreans attended. An Italian-American man in his mid-70s, slightly demented, maybe a little wet-brained, stood at the coffee pot near the door, welcoming everyone who passed through with a "thanks for coming." Afterwards, Stack would not remember a great deal about this particular meeting. The usual people were there. A couple of guys doing probation, half of them loaded, a few earnest Christians, an old Starker from the Furriers Union of long ago, black guys, white guys. The speaker, a man who had been off the sauce for a year, looked young. He was slick. He was a musician. This was his share. As a boy, he told the meeting, he and his family had observed Passover with a Seder. In accordance with tradition, a glass of wine was set aside for Elijah. This was not sweet Concord stuff because my family did not go in for that kind of wine. This was Lafitte Rothschild. So my party trick as a child was I would sneak out, grab a man's coat and a hat I would find somewhere. Then I'd hobble in, doing an old man shtick, the prophet himself, and I'd grab the wine and drink. This amused all my relatives. So, said the young man, I've been in eternal pursuit of my childhood faith. Stack laughed in sympathy, but a feeling of deep sadness overcame him. He did not stay for the serenity prayer. He had the loved daughter who was rash and rebellious. Whenever he needed or wanted his wife, she was dead. He had always had the strength, or at least the toughness, to resist self-pity. A momentary lapse, he thought. That was the joke he made to other policemen when some impulsive perp had tried to pull off some mindless caper. The momentary lapse of a ne'er-do-well, he used to say, breaking everybody up. Thanks for coming, said the guy as Stack went out. He took the easiest route home. Climbing the porch steps, like the steps to the upper floor, exhausted him. He sat down in the nearest armchair to recover his breath. Immediately he knew that Maud was home, and the ways he knew propelled him back along their history in a manner that battered his heart. There was the perfume, the marijuana, the booze smell that had not been loosed in the house since her last departure. And under these, in his weak moment, all the effluvia of her childhood, beloved and terrifying, of joy and rage. He stood up unsteadily and, having a practical side, reached in his pocket for the inhaler. The stairs were a hassle, but he lived from day to day. There in Maud's bed was the lovely mess of her, hair over the pillow and the rain-wet clothes scattered around. The worst thing about her was the smell of tobacco, which he decided he would not abide. Not a word had come from her, but the Christmas holidays would soon be on them, something he paid little attention to, but of course she would be home for that. She looked comfortable enough and would have been drinking whatever she'd brought, so he left her there. Maud ended up in some mobbed-up club in the meatpacking. Thin film of blow on the bar, practically more of it on the ladies' room fixtures. The guy said he was on Wall Street. Well, his brokerage house was in Jersey, but he lived downtown, not far from Ground Zero. Really, my father was at Ground Zero for about half a minute. She let that go. My old man don't work. He's a cop in Queens. The place she woke up in was a filthy apartment that smelled of asbestos and lead and dead people and guys making free telephone calls to Poland. He was gone. But she didn't steal anything or fuck up assholes' apartments for revenge. She might have done it once. She tried drinking his bargain scotch and could barely keep it down. The guy had left a condom floating in the toilet, which was kind of reassuring in its disgusting way. No shower, just a crummy bathtub with feet. That at least, she thought. It was a sort of date rape, but she thought the hell with it. She wasn't sure, but he hadn't seemed to get it on. Maybe, she thought, he put the condom in the John to impress her, to induce happy false memories. Anyway, she got out of there, went home, and cleaned up properly. She slept again, but when she woke up, her thoughts were about Brookman, and she could not bring them to order. Brookman is her professor boyfriend. She tried to bring Brookman's wife into focus of her memory. It was ridiculous, so ridiculous, the Brookmans, that in the midst of her pain and distraction, she had a vision of the absurdity of her own grief and loss. Female students often discreetly observed Brookman's wife, smiley face, big teeth, whitey blonde hair and a ponytail. You could hardly tell she was getting gray. Her eyes were a little close together and wild blue. She wore big horn-rimmed glasses. Some of them called her a dog, but with big tits. She had a big ass, oh yeah. Some said her ass was humongous, but that was only because she had one, and some of them didn't. Her neck was wrinkly, her face too, from the sun. She dressed badly. She looked like one of the women on the PBS nature shorts you saw when you were a kid. Oh, Maud thought, there were a million happy-go-lucky women wearing khaki shirts, being smart in nature shorts, and sticking their fingers in wombats' ears. But there was only one Brookman, and only one me. Maybe on the next canoe trip she can wander into quicksand, and they'll find her horn-rimmed glasses on the top, and the rest of her 30 million years later. Laughing and crying, she spun around in her smoke-filled room until she sank to her knees by the bed, pressing her face in her forearm. She burst out of her room to look downstairs and saw her father reading the day's mail and a copy of the Gazette beside him. He looked up at her gravely. "I owe you a bottle of whiskey," she said, and she wanted to say, "Don't look so pathetic." And there were so many other things she wanted to say. "Forget it," he said coldly. "No, I'll get you one right now. I'll go out. I'm really sorry. I've been out of my head." "Yes, I'll forget it." She breezed past his chair to get him a glass of cold milk. He followed her into the kitchen. She has written a inflammatory article about anti-abortion protesters, which is what he's reading. "Hey, Maud," he said. He held up the college paper. "What's this?" "That's my contribution to the Gazette, Dad." "Don't they have a thing called hate speech?" "It is not hate speech," she shouted at him. "It's the advocacy of the rights of women to access and control their lives, and not have them controlled by, you know who I mean, don't you, Dad? Controlled by hypocrites. You were the one who told me Grandpa's stories of Fat Frank Spellman in New York." "Never mind, Fat Frank Spellman," Stack said. He ran out of breath and sat down next to his oxygen machine, though he did not pick up the tube. "Oh, Morty, you don't understand it at all. You don't get it. You put yourself in danger. You think the whole world is that college." "If I want to speak out, Dad." Oh shit, Stack said. Speak out. Speak out. Stand tall. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Victory to the Viet Cong. Those people don't come from where you come from. Not in any way, you get it? You'll be the one that pays for riling up the religious fanatics and shithead. It'll be you that pays. What do you bet? Not some rich kid. Not one of these professors. You. Oh, thanks, Dad. Thanks for wishing me well. I mean, if they wanted to do that, how come they got a Catholic girl to do it? Me? I'm not a Catholic girl. Sure, baby, whatever you say. And speaking of professors, how come your advisor there, that guy, Brookman, he's your advisor. He should have known if he has your interests at heart. Where was the advice? How come he let you? Steve Brookman never saw it. Then he's not much of an advisor. I guess not, she said. She picked up the tube of his oxygen tank, pressed on the button, inhaled, and looked at him. Not a kid anymore, he thinks. Not anyone's child. He's your lover, isn't he? Come on, Morty. I don't get to see you much, but I can tell by how you talk about him. You don't read my email, do you? Never mind. Listen, he said, I want to tell you something. People's religion, it's not like opium. It don't work that way. It's their mother, you understand? They may not understand their mother at all. They may hate their mother. Maybe they're ashamed of their mother. Sometimes a mother makes someone hate other people. Anything can drive such people to anything. He thought back for a moment and laughed a little. When I started swinging a stick, they told me, put them in their place. Tell them what shits they are. But for God's sake, don't mention their mother. I don't care, she said. I'm proud of what I wrote. She thought, I can't stay here. He will be hurt and upset, but I can't stay here. So later that day, when he was out at a meeting or taking his walk, she packed her duffel bag and put on Shell's coat and went to Manhattan, where she knew some girls. When Stack returned, he saw that she had gone. He was afraid and disappointed because he had thought she would stay over the holidays. At least he had thought that before the brouhaha over the article. Dizzy, he stayed on his feet. Barbara, he called. Of course, he remembered, every time Stack needed his wife, she was dead. So, good point. Thank you. Thanks very much. Shall I stay? Any? Let's go. Right.
I keep thinking of the character of Converse in Dog Soldiers and of Brookman at the same time. And perhaps that's unfair to both of them. But that character, that surviving character who's engaged and goes through a kind of harrowing and comes out, seems to appear and reappear, a Converse kind of character.
Not unrelated characters, but these two are not as alike as they appear. I hope they don't appear too alike, but they are really very different in perspective in attitude, in character. So that in the case of Stack and Converse, it's in the case of these two characters, they are not similar enough not to bear the charge of being representations of the same attitude or personality. I say this in defense, in artistic defense of the rendering of these characters. Then, no, well, no, they are, as they say in the trade, point of view characters, but they are not the same character or representations really of the same attitude or personality. And this is really me defending myself, defending them, defending the nature of the book, which perhaps I have no business doing in terms of what you're asking. But I guess it's compulsive on my part to say that no, they are not. They are not aspects of the same attitude or character.
The early passage where you described his health and he's walking up the stairs, and it sort of culminates with the phrase dry drowning, which I thought was great, just great. And I can't imagine writing that myself. So I'm curious how you arrived at that. I mean, is that just like a day at the office, it pops out as you're writing the text and that's it and we're done? Is it that you had written something more lengthy and then you went back and said, I need to tighten it up? Or was it, that's sort of the culmination of the passage and I'm looking for a phrase that'll just nail it? I'm just curious how you could get to that.
Well, it suggests itself to the condition. I mean, to what they informally call COPD. I mean, it's just not being able to breathe very well. I mean, I used to do a lot of diving. Maybe who knows? Maybe I'd like to think in my more self-heroizing modes that because I was once in the Naval Amphibious Force and we used to go through a lot of smoke screens, things like that. And I would like to think that it was all this experimental sacrifice on behalf of my country's far-flung interests that that acquainted me with the concept of dry drowning. But actually, I think it was lots and lots of Chesterfields from an early age. Now, somebody wrote a wonderful poem in Harper's once. I can't remember who the author was, about emphysema. They didn't use the phrase dry drowning, but they certainly managed to express the condition and the feeling that goes with it. And it's just the kind of panic-stricken moments that occur to you when you're not able to breathe. I mean, it's not as though I hope I don't seem to be feeling sorry for myself, because I do have a touch of COPD, and a lot of people have it far worse than I do. I mean, far worse, and it's a very difficult condition. So what I'm trying to do simply is refer to what it feels like to walk around in in God's air that He gives us and not be able to use it right.
Did those two words just pop in your head, or you just knew it? I mean, in other words, did you have to think about how am I going to articulate this, or was it just like there?
It was pretty much there. It was pretty much just there.
You've written, I think, I'm aware of 2 books of short stories, as well as the novels and a memoir. I just wanted to ask you about having written a book of short stories myself recently after writing a lot of novels, or a number of them. I wanted to ask you about your take on the transition going from a novel to writing short stories.
I was always in awe of the short story, and I think it's because I came to read short stories through reading the great masters of the short story. And I think I was plain intimidated. I mean, I read the greatest of short story writers, and it kind of stopped me in my tracks. In a way, I came to writing by thinking to myself, God, I would love to do this. I want to be able to do this. I mean, reading the great masters. To read something like Gatsby, when you're a teenager, you think, or I thought, I want to do this. I want to do this more than anything I can conceive of. I want to be able to do this. So I think I hesitated before the short story as a form, simply because I admired it so much. I was so in awe of it. So it was always harder for me, and always caused me more hesitation than undertaking a novel. In a way, it's easier to write a novel because you can always get back to it the next day, and undo, all the chaos that you caused the day before. But the stories that I've written that I think are successful, I'm very proud of. But it's a very different process. I think simply because, I mean, it is really like loosing an arrow, or winding up a pitch. I mean, it has to break in the way that the curve has to break. It is something that that I admire, and before which I hesitate. If I do a story that I think is successful, I think you have done it more often than I have. So maybe you speak with greater confidence. I mean, that could be. But no, I love the short story. I admire it, perhaps excessively. I don't know, but to me, it's a very different experience, and the satisfactions of completing it, the satisfactions of presenting it, are ones that I deeply enjoy. But I do find the experience of getting it down there on paper, I do find it a different experience doing the short story. I admire the short story very much. I admire your short stories very much. Yeah. We can go into a...
But it feels like it's almost a different part of your brain operating when you're writing stories than the part of your brain that operates when you're writing novels. I mean, in a phenomenological sense. Is that true for you?
I think it's true. I think you have a moment in the short stories that work for me. It really feels quite different. It's as though there is a moment that you stumble on. This is true of novels. In a way, writing is writing, and you control the form as you become more experienced and you know what you want from the work. But yes, it's probably going too far to say, well, psychologically, it's a different experience. But the execution of a successful short story, or an effective short story, a pleasurable short story for the reader, is different from the execution of a novel. Very satisfying and different. I mean, I think what I feel are the best short stories that I've done, in a way, are I don't know whether I'm accurate here or not, but I think they're the most satisfying things I've done for me. I hope for the reader. I think. Sorry to be a little tentative. But, thank you all. Thank you for coming tonight. Right.
And thank you for the really nice comments. And Russell, thank you for the marvelous words beforehand. Again, those of you out on the internet, feel free to call in. We'll get you a book signed. And those of you here, go out and buy 5 each. They're up the front desk. And Bob will be right here signing as well. Thank you all for coming.